Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hi, and welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth with me, your host, Peter Robbins. For today's show, we will be heading to England with our first guest in Lincolnshire and our second guest in the city of Hull on the second hour, along with another American colleague. But without any kind of monologue today, I don't want to lose any time on our subject for the afternoon, morning, or evening, and so we'll get right to it. In Out of Time, author Steve Aspin attempts to write a crossover work about the enduring worldwide reports of alien abduction. It is intended for both those familiar with the historic published case material and the curious reader unfamiliar with the decades of serious research on this superficially improbable phenomena. Steve details his lifelong personal experiences and the relationships he built with leading researchers during his years of investigating this phenomena. He has at times attempted to approach the subject with critical thoroughness and intellectual rigor. Although successfully normalized in popular culture to become background noise or a minor comic footnote in otherwise busy lives, this subject has real and serious implications for both the individual experiencer and human society collectively. Out of Time is Steve Aspin's first book on the subject of UFO and alien research and abduction research, following a lifetime of what are often described as anomalous experiences. His serious interest in this complex subject began in 2007, when he realized that the phenomena was not only real, but was happening to him and had been all his life. He spent several years researching publications on the subject, met with many of the world's leading researchers into the phenomena, and tried his best to make sense of it all for his own peace of mind. He achieved this to some degree, and for several years chose to no longer engage the issue. However, following some serious health issues and on the encouragement of those close to him, he decided to write about his experiences and thoughts on the phenomena as he has come to understand it. The decision to go public is never an easy one for a person involved in something as unbelievable as alien abduction. Derision, disbelief, and denial are the common responses. But something is happening to people and needs to be addressed. Retired, without children, and with support of those closest to him, common obstacles that often inhibit people from speaking out are now no longer factors in his life. And if not him, then who? And Steve Aspin, my dear friend, I'd like to welcome you back to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Hello, Peter.
How goes it this evening for you?
It's great. It's a little 5 hours later here, so it's already near sunset, and the weather's 25 degrees, and it's been a beautiful summer's day. And as we will be talking together, we will watch the sun go down over the Lincolnshire Wolds. So
beautiful. I want to begin with just a personal note here, and then take it to you. A year ago in May, my sister Anne and I visited you and Janice, and in talking, you mentioned that you had written this manuscript, and I was taken aback, first because we've known each other 15 years. You confided some of this information to me over the years, but I know there was always that buffer zone to the rest of the world, as is often the case with folks who've had these experiences. And you asked me if I would read a chapter, and I remember thinking something that one does when you're a writer and you get to the point where other writers are saying, when you read what I've written, if it's somebody you don't know, you can be professional and dispassionate. If you like what they've written, you let them know and encourage them. If you don't think they're very good, you do your best to be diplomatic. Nobody wants to bring anybody, make them feel awkward or that they're not good at what they do. But it can be particularly challenging if it's somebody that you love, it's a friend of yours. And so you pray or hope that you will like it. And
that it's not too bad.
Yeah, it's not too bad. That's very kind as well. As you know, I was quite swept away by it. Not surprised that you expressed yourself as clearly and as fully as you did, that you did your homework, but that it was, and of course I read the full manuscript not that long after, having probably read almost every piece of literature written by experiencers and abductees that's gone into print. And it's now, a genre within the UFO world of publishing. I realized I was reading a book unlike any that I had ever read before, in part because nobody with your profile as a human being has ever written a book about their experiences. And it gave, in my mind, us in the rest of the world, the research community, those interested in the subject, a new profile, and one that might raise the anxiety of a certain level of the populace because they could relate to it and because there was nowhere to run. You had covered all the bases. You had presented evidence and documentation, histories, and woven in a very concise and very accurate history of main characters, main events along the way. The book went on sale, as I recall, last September, available on Amazon, started to sell well. You started to accept more and more interview requests, and the plan was for you to speak next month along with me at the Hull Outer Limits UFO conference, which unfortunately has been pushed back to next year. But then something happened that didn't make sense on the surface, and then kind of in a darker sense did, which was your book disappeared off of Amazon, which caused you to rethink, re-strategize, and come out with the second edition. Why don't you pick it up there, Steve? You got that book onto Amazon. Everything was going well. There are so many, countless authors that sell there and, do their business there in great part. But when that chain got yanked and all of a sudden you were not there and not getting a reason why, that had to be distressing, confusing, and I'm guessing frustrating and somewhat angering as well. Can we take this back a little further to any point that you'd like to start this first hour of the show?
Yeah, the book, the first edition was published on the 12th of September last year, and that's the book, the first edition. The second edition is here. It's pretty much the same cover-wise, but it says second edition on it. You see,
you can see it
now. There's a hardcover and a paperback and an ebook, so we can talk about that in a while. But the first edition went on sale in September and sold well for 6 months. And on the 31st of March, it's actually, step back a bit, it was actually published by Kindle Direct Publishing, which is a separate company which is under the Amazon family. And Kindle Direct Publishing published the book, so they had complete control over its distribution as well. So the contract says that you will sell it only through the Amazon websites, or if you want what they call an extended distribution. In other words, the book can be available in bookstores and so forth. You have to, nonetheless, Amazon is doing the printing and distribution, so they have complete control over it. It sold about 1,200 copies for something like a bit more than that. Then in March, on March 31st of March, I woke up in the morning and to find a message on the phone to say that the KDP account had been terminated and I was denied access to everything about the book online, and they'd removed it from sale globally, worldwide. And the only explanation that was offered was that my name was associated, that's the phrase, associated with a different account which had been terminated for content violations. And I asked them repeatedly in all sorts of polite ways and from all sorts of angles if they could furnish me with any evidence of this, and what was the identity of this account that I was supposed to be involved with. And I was never given any evidence. That it just disappeared. After the 12th of April, when the appeals process was exhausted, I finally decided to publish with a new publisher, and I went to Grosvenor House Publishing, which is a UK publisher in Surrey, and they have been absolutely fantastic. And I always wanted a very good cloth-bound hardcover edition alongside the paperback, and that's what Grosvenor House has been able to do. They published a cloth-bound hardcover with color illustrations, color interior, and that's just gone on sale, and it's with 105 GSM paper, and it's a really fine artifact. And there's also a paperback for more price-sensitive customers, because I think that'll sell really well. It's cheaper than KDP's paperback. UK recommended retail price is £15, and the US price is going to be a little bit more, but less than $20. And they're both now on sale from all the bookstores and from all the Amazon sites, strangely, because it's KDP have no control over it, but they are reselling it. They're stocking it and reselling it.
So interesting.
It's been available for pre-order since the 3rd of August, which is a week ago, and when they're recording this, and I don't know when this interview will go out live, but by the 24th of August it will be on general sale in all the bookstores. Yeah. So that's where we are.
Yeah. The general subject of UFOs and their implications, truly anomalous UFOs, has been, up until the last half dozen years, just considered an outsider subject by most people, conspiracy oriented to some degree. This was before we entered the golden age of conspiracies. And at this point, you do this work, you're involved in it. I've had the experience of being as sure as I can be, and then having it verified that many years ago my telephone was being monitored, which caused me some real anxiety. There is this kind of romantic idea among some people in the field that the government's watching me, or I'm endangering myself by being so heroic and putting myself on the line with these secrets. At the same time, you're a very pragmatic person. You are extremely well grounded. You're very much in the real world. And how, at the same time, could you not help think that something is afoot here? This doesn't make sense. The explanation I'm being given is nonsense. And this juggernaut has simply decided, for their own reasons, to remove my book. What were some of your thoughts about what had happened and why?
Yeah. From my introduction to this subject a few minutes ago, that's a really potted history. There's a little bit more a few more clues which I didn't really go into. One is that in January last year, I had a strange message from Amazon that one of my posts, that's when you post something on a chat forum, was suspected to be a violation of the content rules. And I asked, I thought it was a mistake. I just thought I'd been mailed in error.
Sure.
So I just wrote back and said, I haven't made a post on any forum for 5 years. So could you please tell me what you're talking about? And I had received no response back, none. Complete radio silence. Then about 2 weeks later, I started to notice the reviews of Out of Time were being manipulated on the Amazon website. So I had some 5-star reviews, which, if they're verified, way Amazon system works with reviews is if you're a verified purchaser, that is, you purchase the artifact, whatever it is, a set of teaspoons, a box of tools, a piece of furniture, a book, from Amazon directly on your Amazon account, then it counts as a verified purchase. And you have this little badge next to your review, verified purchaser. Verified purchaser reviews are always displayed on all the international websites as well. So the Amazon DE in Germany, Amazon FR in France, Amazon co.uk in the UK, everywhere else.
Sure.
Australia, they're all displayed next to the product. But reviews that are not verified purchases are only displayed in the jurisdiction of the reviewer. So that if you're American and you didn't buy the book from Amazon.com, then you have reviewed it nonetheless, then your review appears only on Amazon.com. It doesn't appear on the international network. So we had several 5-star reviews on the international through the international network, which started disappearing one at a time from February onwards. And then this thing happened in March with no other warning. And when the account was just suddenly closed like a guillotine. The other strange thing is there were a couple of other authors in this field who were similarly sanctioned at the same time. You actually put me in touch with a couple of them. And to my knowledge, all their books, all their accounts have been restored, and all their books are now on sale again. But it took a couple of months, and then they're quietly reintroduced. But my book wasn't. No.
One of them was our Scottish colleague, Malcolm Robinson. And
who's famous for being the only non-naval person to go to the bottom of Loch Ness in a submarine. Yeah. Looking for the monster. But, and you gotta love him. He's written 20 books, which has been really, published not by Kindle Direct Publishing, but by, various presses, notably Flying Disc Press, but others as well. And his account was also taken offline, and eventually, about after 2 months, it was introduced. But his appeals were apparently listened to, or it was felt that my book shouldn't be out there.
When you first told me about this, I approached the subject of UFO research with the general understanding that the most likely explanation for any new phenomena that comes before me, no matter how exotic, the odds are better that it's explainable in conventional terms. Mm-hmm. There are those of us who love the romance of the subject and who have studied it enough that to some degree we no longer have what I'd call the luxury of wholesale disbelief. And it's incumbent on us to be doubly responsible to not just say, oh boy, another truly anomalous UFO, and who knows, maybe it's from Alpha Centauri, and I'm going to look at it in that way, as opposed to the great Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes deductive reasoning. And beginning with the most boring, mundane, everyday possibility, examining as fully as you can, and if it doesn't pan out, taking one giant step up to the second most boring, mundane possibility. It's a process that is not very sexy, and it's kind of boring, and I have colleagues who reject it. But for me, it's time tested, to the sense that when you've eliminated all of the conventional possibilities, that's when things get more exciting and interesting. And my first thought was, you know, Amazon is kind of like the internet. It's like the mind of, a mercantile god. There's so many moving parts. Surely there's something conventional. There was no nefarious intent. And then
Maybe.
the thing about the
Mm.
5-star reviews disappearing,
Mm.
that's no, wait, we've got a problem here. And this is a free speech issue. It's an issue of, I am a hugely powerful organization, individual, conglomerate, and what you're doing makes me corporate wise and individual wise uncomfortable. And so I'm putting you out of my mind and out of the minds of other people. But wait, there is money to be made here. And oh, well, let's bring him back with the new publisher, as well as Malcolm and these other authors, and let the chips fall where they may. One can only wonder what's going on in the minds of the decision makers here. But somebody made a decision that was, it should go against the grain of everybody that believes in free speech.
Yeah, well, I don't come down with any definitive explanation as to what happened, but I think that a lot of things are really very strange and indicative that somebody somewhere didn't want this book out there. I think, somebody told me, a very well-known person in this field told me, when you're right over the target, the flak is the strongest. And I think this account and Out of Time is basically right over the target. I think there's very little in there that is speculative. That nearly everything in there is evidential and is forensically diagnosed, analyzed. Right. Yeah,
it's one of the reasons why the book is so valuable and powerful as a research document, and one of the reasons why it is so damned uncomfortable for any wag that just wants to dismiss this nonsensical subject of human beings.
A lot of people do. Yeah. Because I recognize I've worked for 35 years in surgery and medicine, with diagnostic medicine with surgery. So I know hundreds of surgeons, hundreds of working surgeons in hospitals all over Europe, all over the UK, all over the world. And they're my customers. And I know the way these professional people think, that they don't, the reason why they usually dismiss a subject like this is because they think there's very little medical forensic evidence attached to it. So what there is suspect. So I made a big effort when writing Out of Time to include as much forensic, medical, scientific evidence as possible, and a lot of like there's reports. There's photographs of the kind of injuries that abductees suffer, that in regular scarring on the skin in regular patterns. They're all the same. They're series of dots or points are like incisions in geometric patterns, which people wake up with, these scoop mark scars, which is where a little bit of soft tissue is taken out, probably something about, I can't think in inches anymore, but maybe 1/4 of an inch across. So about 5 millimeters or more than 5 millimeters across, where it's like an ice cream scoop has been used to scoop some ice cream out of a bowl.
Self-cauterizing.
Sure. And there's straight line scars, often of 12 inches in length, which are completely healed, but they look like scar tissue from years ago, and people just wake up with them. And so I photograph those in the book, and I detail how my scoop mark scar was analyzed by a dermatological clinic in Manhattan, and how it was the cells were sent to a lab when it was biopsied. So there's a report in there about that, and I've got a report in there of some hairs which we found after an event in 2015, which ended up finally, after my wife found the hairs the morning after the event, she put them in a sealed Ziploc plastic bag and hid them, so I wouldn't know where they were, and so I couldn't find, because they can read your minds. It sounds paranoid to somebody who doesn't understand the phenomenon, but it's
part of the way it is.
It is. And eventually we found a forensic analysis laboratory in Illinois called Microtrace LLC. And these hairs were sent there by special courier. And simultaneously, pretty much simultaneously, another hair from another abductee from California ended up there as well. And these hairs were analyzed together. The two hairs from our house and the one hair from this abductee in California, who I never met. I don't know who she is, but she found it after an abduction event, and was really certain exactly how she acquired it. So they ended up at Microtrace in Illinois, and there's the report on these hairs is also in the book, which makes very interesting reading. And there's also an analysis of an implant from a materials analyst called Steve Colburn, which takes up 40 pages. He published in 2009, and it's an implant which was removed from one of the patient's extremities in his toe, because the surgeon Roger Lear, who passed away in 2014, you may know, or many of your listeners and viewers may know that Roger was a podiatric surgeon who removed these things from abductees for 14 years, or 19 years actually. He removed 18 different objects over 19 years, and there's an analysis of one of those in the book, and it's the very, very interesting. Sorry, I've got Chris Evers' bio popping up on the screen there. The shells are made of woven of hemosiderin, protein coagulum, and keratin, and these are three biological materials present in the human body in very small forms. Keratin is what many people know is the prime constituent of nails and hair. So it only occurs right on the surface of the human body. You don't find it inside the human body. And protein coagulum assists in tissue respiration, and hemosiderin is an ingredient of the blood that contributes to clotting and works with the body's thrombocytes. So there's three different biological elements in there, and they're woven together in this shell, and the shells are protruding from the shells are nerve proprioceptors. So that means they are designed to pick stuff up and probably transmit it somewhere. And the inside the little shell, when they're cracked open, it's because it's all microsurgery. When they're cracked open in the lab, inside is carbon nanotubes, which are just a few molecules thick. They're tiny little nanotubes, but structures, not biological structures, but they're metallic structures inside. And they transmit radio waves in three specific frequency bands, and they all transmit radio waves in these three specific frequency bands. So they're engineered, very highly engineered technological devices.
Yes,
and several of them have been removed and analyzed, and so there's an analysis of one of these devices also in the book, and it takes up quite a lot of space actually, but it's important when you're dealing with my target audience, which is scientifically educated professional people who want to have something physically, forensically, scientifically verifiable to grab hold of, to say this is real. It's necessary to give that much detail. So that's much detail is there. I suspect it's those things. I was discussing this with Whitley Strieber at length when this incident happened, because Whitley and I talk often. And he says that he thinks this stuff was principally what concerned whoever has been concerned, and whose ever buttons were pressed by the presence of this information in the world, but unfortunately, in the second edition, I kind of doubled down on this a bit.
Good.
So,
it's crucially important.
And this time, I'm very, very, very certain the publisher cannot and will not be interfered with it, because they're a small UK independent publisher, and I've got to know them really well. And there's no way the book can just be yanked, because it's going out through multiple channels, through multiple organizations. It's going in all the high street bookstores. This time, it's not just for sale through Amazon websites or anything. It's really on general release now. So this time, it's not likely to disappear.
No,
It's
you have nailed down the corners, I think, and glued down the edges. Made me think of several things while you were speaking. One, Dr. Roger Lear, who I remember with not just great respect, but great fondness, and the times that he would come to New York City, and the great fun we would have with him and Bud. One of the things that Dr. Lear did that answered a huge question for me, going back to when I first heard this idea some decades ago of what sounded just like, a crank science fiction line of alien implants in human bodies. My first logical thought was, you remember when you're a kid, or now, you get a splinter, and it's either something that your mom has to pull out with a tweezer, or you can just pull out. But almost when it goes in within minutes, it gets red around the edges. A sign of, a fight beginning to go on.
Normal inflammatory response of the body's immune system.
Yes, I know I'm speaking to the right person in terms of medical technology. And my first thought, as a totally non-technical or medical thinking person, was, how the hell is it that these things, which are inserted subcutaneously and show no scarification, a history of them being inserted well up into the nasal cavity, as in the case of Linda Corteil in the witness case, as in the case of my sister Helen. How is it that the body's defenses don't recognize it? That, white blood cells don't go running, with their battle flags flying. And it was Roger who was the one to discover that these very small objects have the equivalent of the kind of coating that we see on a stealth aircraft. That literally, yes, and that the body simply does not recognize them. And when he actually tried to peel it off with a brand new scalpel with, a micro tweezer holding it, he couldn't. And all of a sudden it made sense, not just why the body didn't see these things, but just one more moment where you go, they have thought this out. And in the spirit of the premise of Gene Roddenberry's original Star Trek being, I think, 300 years in the future, this technology, 50,000, 100,000, a million, 8,500 years, we don't know, but they are well in advance of us. And again,
sorry, I was doing a podcast with Whitley Strieber, and we were discussing this, and he's certain, his own perspective is that these scoop marks that show up on abductees when they take some cells from you, and they take like a little scoopful of cells, they use that genetic material to engineer in the engineering of these devices so that they can reimplant them again, or maybe they clone the material somehow, so that when they reimplant them in the abductee, in the specific individual abductee, that his or her immune system doesn't recognize that as a foreign object. It recognizes the cells as part of its own structure. So that's his perspective on what's going on. And in fact, as Steve Colburn says in his analysis and materials and analysis of this object, that it may, in his concluding section, it may be that there is what he calls, some black program in the black world, the people who are supposed to be reverse engineering crashed, interplanetary craft or whatever, extraterrestrial vehicles, somewhere in that black world, in these really big corporations with billions of dollars worth of money to spend. It's possible that in that world, they might be able to engineer something like this.
Yes.
But anybody below that level wouldn't be able to contemplate doing it.
You remind me, Steve, this has got to be at least 25 years ago, picking up a news story. It was from an agricultural publication in the United States that was sent to me for obvious reasons about the beginning of humans engineering implants, but much larger, much clunkier, and for a very understandable purpose. Namely, they were about the size of an American $quarter, and they were made, with the battery in it, to be subcutaneously inserted into a slit, an anesthetized slit in a cow's ear, and then healed with a range of maybe even a couple of miles, so that if your animal wandered onto the next property, you essentially had a LoJack, and you could trace the animal down. It didn't require terribly, radical technology, but then they got smaller and smaller. Then a number of articles, and probably going back about 10 years, in law enforcement publications around the idea of, you have made a huge success of yourself. You're a person of means. Your children might be a target for, some nefarious action or blackmail or kidnapping. Why not consider inserting a small device into your child so that blah, blah, blah. And I remember my blood ran a little cold. And at the same time, seeing a parallel series of propositions around, you're a convicted felon. You have proved yourself to be a potential menace to society. Your civil rights are of secondary concern to us. We're going to put one of these things in you so that if you go on the lam, we can have a better chance of finding you. Both of these things are very dystopic, very 1984, and one can see the logic behind them. When I started working with Bud Hopkins years ago, and this subject started to come up, theorizing, well, you just laid it out, but how many possibilities are there? There can be recording and tracking. There can be the possibility of some aspect of control or some aspect of internal body data collection. It all seems so over the top to any rational, open-minded person who has not studied this subject, taken the time to review available quality literature. And I thought, in your book, one of the things that you do that I thought was natural and logical, but also extremely wise to bring your audience in, was you begin not by talking about this greater phenomena, but by yourself, about yourself. And your beginnings of your awareness with this, the fact that on your mother's side of the family, there seems to be a history of this. And that's another thing. It was dear Dr. David Jacobs, who is today 81 years old and a pioneer researcher in this field, who those of us that know Dave know he has a wonderfully sharp sense of humor. And when Bud had really just completed his first wave of research in the publication of Missing Time, a vitally important book and a real paradigm shifting one, to open this subject to more legitimate, serious scientific inquiry, published in 1981. Dave, in reflecting back on the years preceding it, why the UFO research community, overwhelmingly composed of middle-aged white guys, which I guess it is to a degree still, why they kept away from the subject. And what he explained was these were guys sincere, people sincere about wanting to be taken seriously. It was all right in the great social milieu to discuss sightings, radar returns, declassified documents, trace cases where an anomalous situation would happen and affect the organic material it had come in contact with, but really not okay to talk about the beings. And the way that Dave summed it up was we were focused on the cars and not the drivers. And I thought that said it well, because talking about the drivers was shorthand for saying I may be delusional. And the fact is, we all thought that if this has happened to you, like say a seeming Travis Walton case, it's like getting hit by lightning. It's very rare. And if it happens to you, bang, that's it. It's once. It's like winning the £1 million lottery twice. But in fact, we know now it's just the opposite. If this has happened to you, it has happened to you very likely since you were very young, and will happen to you on and off through many years of your life, because for their own reasons, they are following certain bloodlines. We can make our educated guesses about them. Can you tell us a little bit about how you begin the book and begin to lay out this story? I think it's very important.
Sure. Yes, it's important. There's a lot of books on the abduction subject in the public domain. A lot of abductees, once they've kind of come out, into the public domain a bit, they want to write about their experiences. And Out of Time is not really, I make the point in the introduction that Out of Time is not really one of those books that's just about this. Well, these are my experiences, and this is what happened to me, and this happened to me, and that happened to me, and this happened to me. It's about the phenomenon and what it is, what's actually going on. And it's so improbable and so unlikely. And the reason why a lot of people don't take it seriously is because it's so improbable and it's so unlikely against our existing paradigms of what reality is. You can just about cope with beings from another star system getting here somehow through utilizing multi-dimensions or quantum loop gravity or wormholes or some exotic technology that they have obviously mastered. You can just about take that on board. Well, some people can. Some people can't even do that, but you can't really take on board the idea that these extraterrestrial beings will be so intimately involved with the human race or certain members of the human race that they're carrying out a program to genetically very slowly modify a representative number of humans. Probably about, we think it's about between 2 and 5% of the human race is involved in this. And I give quite a lot of evidence to support that that's the proportion it is, in the book as well. The title of the book, the subtitle is The Intergenerational Abduction Program Explored. The Intergenerational Abduction Program Explored. All those words are important in that sentence because as you rightly describe, as you rightly point out in the a few minutes ago, it's a program that seems to it's intergenerational. Excuse me, I'll go back a step. So number one, it does seem to be intergenerational. When I was realized something odd was happening to me as a child, which many abductees do as children, and then in your teen years, it kind of changes. You no longer have quite the same relationship with it. It changes at puberty because they're interested in different things then. But I knew that something strange was happening with me, and I always put it down to something on the fairy world, in something, all this Magonia stuff, that's what's usually called by people who in this field, because of Jack Valley's book he published in 1969, Passport to Magonia. It's really strange. I thought it's to do with the other world, to do with something ancestral, to do with something to do with folk tales, something, nature spirits interfering with me or something like that. I had absolutely no idea, no concepts that it could be extraterrestrial beings or flying saucers could be involved in this in any way. I had just no idea about this, because the experiences didn't really until I was later in life. I didn't have a UFO sighting, and there were no UFO sightings associated with these events, because the events that happened at night were just action with these beings. So I asked one of these beings about age 10, why me? Why do I deserve this special favor, this special treatment? And he answered, it's because of your mother and your grandmother and your great grandmother. Full stop. Doesn't go back any further than that. Your mother, your grandmother, and your great grandmother, and you're fourth generation, and that's why you're here. So I couldn't do anything with this information at all for about 35 years, until I finally worked out what this might be to do with. And I started to investigate it from a different angle. But that's, I asked my grandmother, this happened in 1967, and when I was 10, and when I was 12, my grandmother died. But before she died, the year before, because I didn't see her very often, because they lived a few hundred miles away from us at the time, and travel wasn't quite so common in the 60s as it is now for long distances. So I asked her about these incidents, about what happens, what happens at night, and all these things that's these experiences I go through, and with these little people manipulating me and so forth, and feeling so paralyzed and so helpless and so forth. And I asked her about this, and she said, "Oh, Stevie, they're just the pixies. They'll always bring you back." So her understanding of this phenomenon was that this was to do with the folklore thing. This was to do with nature spirits or something that had always been around, and they'd always bring you back. They wouldn't harm you, but they can be quite upsetting, but they take you away and they bring you back. And she was absolutely adjusted to that, convinced of that. And she didn't really share this with anybody else, but she had the idea that it happens to a lot of people, obviously, and all you have to do is wait for a child to ask you about it, and then you could tell them not to worry about it. And unfortunately, she passed on the following year, the year after we had this conversation. So I didn't have any opportunity to go into this as I became a young adult, because when I was 11 or 12, it doesn't, it may just beginning to make sense to me, but I still have no idea about it might be linked to the extraterrestrial thing, So that's that's really where I was introduced to the idea that there was an intergenerational element by them themselves. They told me that at age 11, you know, at 10 or 11, can't remember when, but it's in 1967. So yeah.
So many cultures, of course, have traditions and myths and legends and lore and folk tales about one variation or another of the little people. How logical of her on a certain level. Also, when I read it and I first asked you about it and hearing you say it again, the simple and definitive way that she explained this to you, and I know I'm reading into this, but it suggested to me that this was something she knew. And was simply, you know, I've had this experience, you'll have it, you'll be fine. Which, not a bad way to handle it, all things considered, rather than completely freak out and, you know, get lost in weird possibilities. And your mother's response when you spoke to her about this?
Well, my mother and I, it's a very complicated story, and it's more complicated than I can go into in an interview of this length. But she cloaked the whole phenomenon in spiritualism, and the idea that they were spiritual entities, you know, like pixies, if you like, but spiritual entities. Like she was very attracted to spiritualism, and she became a spiritual healer very late in life, in her 50s. And she died at 65 of a heart condition. But she always was attracted to the occult and the other side of things and the alternative, you know, the healing arts and that sort of stuff. So she those faculties were very strong in her, and she believed in clairvoyance and telepathy and so forth. So she had a lot of experience in these areas and was convinced that these were true, because I suspect one of the things that happens is that abductees who are sensitive enough to respond to we've got a noise. Peter? Oh.
Not to worry.
Is that an aeroplane? An airplane.
You sure?
Yeah. She was, so, you know, that was, I have a little couple of pages on my mother's attitude to this phenomenon at the end of chapter 1, but the whole of chapter 1 is is about 20 odd incidents through my life from birth to when I became certain that it was to do with the abduction issue, that I was an abductee, between point A and point B. As a number of incidents that happened to me, or the things that I went through, or things that I came up against, that were signposts, should have been a signpost, each one a signpost to what was going on. And I didn't at the time put 2 and 2 together, you know, but eventually it all made sense. And I write this narrative in such a way, I hope, that an abductee who isn't certain about what is going on, they know they have a weird life, that their lives are not like other people, and they feel odd, and they feel special in some way, or they feel outsiders in some way, and they don't really feel they fit in society. They're troubled by deep nightmares and feelings about things. That if they read through this, they might recognize that some of these things apply to them, and they might conclude that this has actually been happening to them, and explains a lot of what's been going on with them, if not everything that's been going on with them. So that's why the narrative is specifically written in that way. And after that, you know, the book goes on for another 8 chapters when we delve into the phenomenon from different perspectives.
Yes.
Yeah.
It strikes me that we all have to be skeptics. Again, people like you and I at the top of the list, because
absolutely,
we no longer have the luxury of disbelief, myself intellectually, you experientially, and that I understand arch skepticism, but when it crosses the line into debunking, which in itself, as a brief tangent, that word, I don't know if it was slang in the UK, but 19th century, early 20th century, oh, that's a lot of bunk. And from that, the bunko artist, the con man comes. But the word debunk, to the best of my knowledge, and if anybody can elucidate this for me better, please do. The first reference to the word debunk that I have ever seen is in the Robertson Panel report, the CIA report that lays out the whole strategy for education, basically disinformation. And so for me, the mantra of debunkers is it can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it's something else, and I will pat you on the head and explain it to you, which is a perfect point for me to say, this is Meanwhile Here on Earth, with your host, Peter Robbins, my special guest, Steve Aspin, and we will be back in 4 minutes with some other faces.
It's almost here, ladies and gentlemen. The UNX Network Year 2 anniversary at XCon 2023. XCon is being held this year from October the 30th to November 1st at the beautiful Oasis Hotel and Conference Center in Springfield, Missouri. Top speakers include host of America Unearthed, Scott Walter, plus Haley Ramsey, Sev Tak, UNX's very own Maureen Richmond and Dan Terry, Mindy Toutfest, Harriet McFeely, Forrest Crawford, and many more. And they're all coming to deliver new information on topics like UFOs, alien encounters, cryptids and ancient secrets, and real hauntings from the afterlife. Join us for the film premiere of A Haunting in Blue Hill. And don't miss the Mad Hatter Paranormal Halloween Bash, Banquet, and Costume Contest on All Hallows Eve, October 31st. So join us as we close out the 2023 conference season. Info and tickets are available now at unxnetwork.com. That's unxnetwork.com, and we'll see you there.
And we are back on Meanwhile Here on Earth with me, Peter Robbins, and my special guest, Steve Aspin. I'd like you to meet my dear friend and esteemed colleague from Hull, England. Chris Evers is editor of the PDF-based Outer Limits Monthly magazine. He is the organizer of the yearly Outer Limits Magazine UFO Conference held in Hull in East Yorkshire, and he is the owner of the Paranormal Panorama Network on Anchor, on Spotify, who produces his own monthly show, Signals. His interest in ufology goes back to the 1970s, and he is soon to be a first-time author with a book to be published as it stands right now in December. And Chris Evers, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Hello, Peter. Thank you very much for the invite. It's good to see you again and to speak to you. And I do hope life is treating you well, as I do you as well, Steve.
Hi, Chris.
Great to see you.
It's a fantastic grand piano you've got in that background, yeah?
we've moved home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, people say there's no money
We're
in
actually-
UFO.
I didn't
Nobody
realize you were a
follows
concert
me.
pianist.
Hey, look, and you've seen 10 Forward on Star Trek. This nothing compared to my own mate.
He paid for this place in cash too that he makes in the UFO field. Oh boy, I crack myself up sometimes. Um, Chris, have you been able to listen to us these last few minutes?
I've heard about the last 25, 30
That's
minutes.
great.
We're in the middle of a rewire here, which is why I have the picture up. So, you know, I didn't want to show all the work's going on at the moment.
No, that's great. I was hoping that was the case. You are familiar with Steve's situation, with his story. Again, had the conference been able to go on next month, many people would have had a chance to meet Steve in person. Hopefully, we'll be able to make this happen next year. But you have been involved in this field again for over 40 years, right across the board. And having read the manuscript for your terrific new book, which I am honored to be writing the foreword for, this is not unfamiliar territory to you, but this is the first time a citizen of England, as opposed to quite a number of Americans who have contributed to this subject, has published a book on this subject. Your thoughts off the top of your head about where this sits, so to say, in the pantheon of literature, and why you feel like me that this particular telling of this important story is so unique in its way.
This is unique, quite simply because, well, as you mentioned earlier, I believe that when people tell the stories, it's this happened to me, that happened to me, but Steve hasn't done that. He's gone out and he's really given an ABC of the phenomena and how he's approached this, and he's not spoke down or wrote down to people. You know, he's taken this at a level which we can all see how he has. Well, how his work encompasses the phenomena. It is a brilliant book, and I'm really, really pleased that you've got a second edition out, Steve.
Yeah, yeah. It looks gorgeous. I mean, the fact that it is hardcover, that
Hardcover this time. Yeah.
is in color, you know, not just avid readers of the subject, not just people who want to educate themselves more on it, but book maniacs and bibliophiles like myself and certain other people I can name
Bibliophiles
will need to add this to their library at all costs.
Smash it. Looks brilliant.
I'm really pleased with it. So this is the hardcover, which
That's the real deal.
That's brilliant.
It's on sale now, a pre-order from. It's in Waterstones and it's in Barnes and Noble, and it's in Foyles, and it's in every high street bookshop is available for pre-order. And on the 24th of August, it'll be on the shelves. So it's not just Amazon has this now. It's everybody's going to have it.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Multiple.
Terry. I am delighted to say we have our fourth guest here, and very welcome he is. Terry Lovelace has an undergraduate degree in psychology and a Juris Doctor from Western Michigan University. He served on active duty in the United States Air Force from 1973 to 79 and trained as a medic, EMT, and ambulance driver, which he did for his entire enlistment. Terry is a retired lawyer whose private practice was primarily involved in civil litigation and criminal defense. Terry entered public service as an assistant attorney general for the United States Territory of American Samoa and retired as an assistant attorney general for the state of Vermont a little more than 10 years ago. He is also author of a best-selling book entitled Devil's Den, The Reckoning. In fact, it is currently #1 in its genre in all of Amazon's releases. Now, in 1977, he and a co-worker visited an area, a state park called Devil's Den in western Arkansas. They went to photograph wildlife and instead encountered something wholly other, a triangular-shaped UFO, the experience of which was life-changing. His books Devil's Den, True Story, and Devil's Den: The Reckoning tell the story of a lifetime of interactions with non-human intelligence. Terry has also written a marvelous book exploring the near-death experience. But for this show, we're going to stay focused here. Terry, welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Hi, Peter. It's a delight to be here. Thank you. And
you,
Steve, it's good to talk. Good to finally meet you. Hi. I think we've traded some emails back and forth. Yeah.
Yes, and we're both on Robert Hastings' mailing list. So,
yes. Yes.
So, Terry, I know you haven't read Steve's book, but as somebody who also is, there's a great Yiddish word, mensch. It means a man in all respects. You know, you have lived an adult life, you have served in the military, you are a distinguished retired attorney, you are well-traveled, you are well-educated, and you have had things happen to you since you were young, like Steve, that really defy conventional description, and have told your story in your two marvelous books. I'm wondering, as somebody who is more familiar than most of us with the law in America and the idea of freedom of speech and ways to repress it, Steve's book for me potentially is a game changer in that it can reach parts of the population that other tellings of the story might not have the same access or ability to, the same way your book does that. At the same time, you're off to the side on a certain level as far as the world at large is concerned. Show me, even though you're showing me proof, I need more, because I can't, whatever you show me, I'm going to have to, you know, the idea that this book was removed from the largest purveyor of books in the world with no rational explanation, the fact that it was later restored aside. And I think we can deduce, because we don't have a lot of options here, that it was removed because it was considered an irritant in the great side of the Amazon megalith. Do you have any thoughts just off the top of your head about the situation we find ourselves in here, where somebody has to republish a book to get it out in the world because its contents are so incendiary in a very real way?
That shakes me to the core. I'm disappointed to hear that. You know, my first book, Incident at Devil's Den, is not very friendly toward the United States government, toward the United States Air Force or the Office of Special Investigations.
Yeah.
You know, if Steve's book can be silenced by Amazon, my book could be silenced by Amazon. Anybody's book could be silenced by Amazon, and it seems like an arbitrary process. Steve, you didn't get any kind of explanation or notice, or you just, how did you discover this?
Peter and I talked about this during the first half of the show.
By all means, repeat.
The book was published on the 12th of September 22 by Kindle Direct Publishing, and it sold well for 6 months. And I did about 20 odd podcast interviews, including Coast to Coast AM with George Knapp, and a few other really high profile with people with big audiences. Yeah. And then on the 31st of March 23, I woke up and looked at the phone after about 5 minutes, and there was a message from KDP saying my account had been closed. The book had been withdrawn from sale worldwide, and citing that initially there was no explanation. And I was incredulous, so I'd got the computer fired up and booted up, and sure enough, I couldn't get into the accounts, and looked on the Amazon site, and it said its title is unavailable. We don't know when it'll be back in stock, which up to that point, the legend had said, place an order and you'll get it within a week or whatever. So after a day or two, they wrote to me, or somebody at Kindle Direct Publishing wrote me a message saying that I had apparently, my name had been linked to a different account which had been suspended for content violations. And because my name was linked to this account, the algorithm had said that I was responsible for this and responsible for that. And the account had been closed. And they said I could appeal, and it would take 5 working days for them to examine that. And they get back to me. So I made the appeal. And after 6 working days, I'd heard nothing. So I started to contact KDP. And because they're such a big organization, you phone them up and you get an international number to call, and you think you'd sort of be talking to somebody in Washington State, because that's where the Amazon organization is headquartered. And instead you get some call center in Bangalore or Bombay.
Absolutely.
And then you explain it all to somebody who's no idea what you're talking about, and you quote the reference and the account number and so forth and what's happened, and you give details, and they say they'll call you back when they've sorted it out, and they never do.
They never do.
So a few days later, you make another call, and this time you get through to somebody in Manila, and you just have to start all over again, and you never get anybody to deal with who is competent or informed enough to deal with the problem. So you resort to responding to the original email, which you counseled not to do. And I had to deal with them by email exclusively, when I'm talking to somebody would have been so much more, fruitful, I thought. But still, a lot of the responses are rote, like bot responses. You can tell that from the text it's not specific to you. They just have a button to press for this situation or for that situation, and it's a stock response, which doesn't really tell you very much. And after the 12th of April, I was told that despite my protestations through various channels, they were just going to close the account. And I was pointed to clause 4 in the Kindle Direct Publishing contract, which states, when you read the small print, that Kindle Direct Publishing reserve the right to terminate an author's account and to stop sales of his products without giving a reason and without giving a cause and without notice. And unfortunately, all authors who deal with Kindle Direct Publishing sign up to this, and it's in small print. So really, I'm not sure that what the legal position is now. Whitley Strieber has, and a number of other people have counseled me to take legal action against Amazon, and I haven't completely ruled it out, but because particularly they didn't pay me the last 2 months of royalties, and they told me that I'd never get them, and they're never going to pay them. My priority is to get the second edition back on the market through multiple channels where it can't be stopped and where it can't be taken off sale. So I've worked pretty much flat out for the last couple of months getting that sorted out. So the book is now back on the market, or will be from the 24th of August. Good. And it's back on the market in high street bookstores. You can pre-order it now if you want to, in a hardcover, a paperback, or an ebook formats. So I've got through that process, and the book is now back in the world. And now I've got to think about the Amazon, where I'm going to do anything and take any further action with the Amazon situation.
Well, I don't know if this will help you, Steve, but Limits Magazine, my own publication, we don't have a massive worldwide share, but please send anything that you like to me. My next edition goes out on the 1st of October. I'd love to get some in the magazine for you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yeah, Steve, we know each other anyway. Yeah,
sorry, Steve, do you think it's possible that you're a victim of the algorithm only, or do you think that it goes deeper than that?
I honestly don't know, Terry. I really don't know. It's possible, but I think it's unlikely because of certain other evidence surrounding, like
Talk about the removal of the reviews.
Yeah,
It goes beyond
if
coincidence.
if you missed the first half, Terry, I did have a conversation with Peter about this. There's a system whereby if someone reviews a product on Amazon, whether it's a lawnmower or a pair of scissors or anything, or a book, and they all have the same rules with regards to the product. If they've bought it from Amazon, from their Amazon account, then they become a verified purchaser. Right. And the review shows up on not only the home site, if you live in the United States, it's Amazon.com, but it also shows up on all the Amazon sites worldwide, on Amazon Australia, Amazon in Germany, Amazon in France, it's everywhere. And if you didn't buy this artifact or the book from Amazon, then it's not a verified purchase. And right. So the review is published on Amazon.com if you're in the United States, but it doesn't go outside the United States. So I had several reviews, mainly from Amazon.com, but there's also one or two from Germany and France, places like that, that were all verified purchases, and they all turned up on the international sites. And I noticed from February, they were all starting to disappear. First there was one, and then another one, and then another one. And if I went back to the original site, like, the people in Germany wrote reviews at Amazon.de, I could see the reviews on their website, on the Amazon.de website, but they didn't turn up on the international websites anywhere. So something odd was going on. And then when the book was taken offline initially, all the reviews from Amazon.com disappeared, apart from one single review. And it was the only review that was not 5-star. It was a 2-star review. That's the only one they kept. And that was featured at the top of all the international pages. So that's a very, very odd thing. I think it's very unlikely to be random.
Logarithm governed. That for me shows that there was intent.
It's very unlikely to be random. So there's that, and there's a couple of other indicators that I think this something deliberate and intentional, specific to this book, that they didn't want out there.
And I hope, Terry, that you will read the book.
But yes,
it's a son of a gun in terms of it gives you it gives a anxious skeptic very little place to turn except to what Steve is saying. It's that well thought out and presented. Chris, an impression from you on none of us are in a position to speak for world populations, but you've had your thumb on the pulse of this subject in the UK for decades now. And it's one thing for people to say, all right, I accept the possibility that there are machines of advanced configuration that are coming and going. I'm open-minded. It's not out of the question that we're not alone in, the great cosmos. But this subject, I just have a big problem with. Informing the problem, maybe their personal anxiety that if this is happening, then everything that they thought they knew about the world is open to question. But do you have a sense of where people across the United Kingdom stand, and maybe how it might have changed a little in the last years regarding not the subject of truly anomalous UFOs, but of other intelligences behaving in this manner?
That's actually quite a big question. And we all know, we're all aware, all four of us sat here, and many of our viewers and listeners will be aware of a sea change, which we all know began in 2017. Many people around the world have come to the acceptance now that there is something going on. We still don't know what it is. We still aren't being told what is going on and why it is going on. And one of the things that has always puzzled me about the US hearings is they do not seem to be interested in the alien abduction phenomenon. Now, why is that? Now, that's another question which I suppose we could take time to go into and discuss quite deeply at another time. But over the last few years, the subject of USOs has become quite large, you know, unidentified, submersible, submerged objects, whatever you want to call them, underwater UFOs, to put it bluntly. Now, I read an article, was actually in The Sun, the USA version of the British tabloid The Sun, around about 18 months ago now. And it was from a gentleman by the name of, I'm sure we all know him, Gary Eseltan, who actually picked up on the idea that these devices are from underwater alien bases. Now, who's to say, let's be honest, guys, we all don't know the truth. That's why we're here discussing this. Who's to say that what Steve has experienced, who cannot say that what he's experienced is from them? How are we certain it's from ET extraterrestrials in the strictest sense of the term? You know, I'm sure you can answer that for me, Steve, and you will do in a moment. But at the end of the day, something is going on. We need to know the answers, and we need to know them not 2, 3, 4, 5 years. You know, why are these people who are doing these US hearings, why are they not speaking to not the whistleblowers, the you know, the Elizondos, the Grushis, whatever? Why are they not speaking to the people who talked to the whistleblowers? That, to me, is what they need to be talking to, and that is how we will find the answers to these questions.
Yeah. Well, I do have my own thesis about what this phenomenon is about, but I'm open-minded enough to consider other possibilities, because I can't prove anything definitively, you know. So it could be A, B, C, or D, or A or F, you know. And I make that point in the book, you know. We can't be absolutely certain about anything, but we can be certain about our own experience, and my own experiences lead me to down this particular track, and this is what I think, from what it's worth, you know, is how I summarize things in the final chapter.
I have a question for Terry, but before doing so, I just wanted to mention, Chris, that going back to the 1970s, the great American biologist and also paranormal and UFO author Ivan T. Sanderson wrote, for me, what is an absolutely can't put down book on
USOs.
Unidentified underwater.
Yeah, I've got a copy of it. Yeah,
Invisible Residents.
Me too.
Then I'm trying to remember. Maybe you remember, Steve, the name of the author who Richard Dolan's press published several books by, who also is quite with real scholarship and a lot of research on secret underground bases and underwater bases. But there is, you know, Gary was saying something that was established fact. What I wanted to know from you, Terry, was, as a lifelong experiencer, as somebody who's been taken, as somebody who has written about the subject, who is somebody who has spoken eloquently about it on the media, in person, as an attorney, as somebody who has worked as a trial attorney, how, if our courts of law here in the UK adjudicated such matters, how would you mount a case to establish beyond a reasonable doubt, or at least a case that could be taken so seriously that it be referred to a grand jury, on the reality of human beings being taken by other intelligences in return? Has that ever crossed your mind, or something?
Absolutely. When I read Linda Moulton Howe's books, multiple books on cattle mutilations.
Yeah.
I had the thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could file a suit
Yeah.
on behalf of these farmers collectively?
Yes,
But
exactly.
the issue, any second-year law student will tell you the issue is service of process. How do we get a subpoena or a complaint into the hands of ET to the satisfaction of the court?
That's a challenge.
Yeah.
I wonder, if these congressional committees continue, and if they do start to build steam, and if there are more and more elected officials in America with a certain amount of clout who are knowing that ridicule doesn't bother them anymore. There's no chance that they're going to have their sanity or their career questioned by taking this subject seriously in a public forum, that we may hit some kind of tipping point where a legal process will come into play in some way to establish, for those who still doubt, or to make the case that there is every reason to accept this for what it is, rather than all of the pablum and the nonsense and the pseudoscientific explanations that we've been getting for decades now. We really are entering uncharted territory.
Well, one witness, one good whistleblower, David Grush, can speak to, he has personal injury to his career. And now again, with the release of his personal medical information, violation of the HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, I think David Grush would have a chance at filing a lawsuit against certain government entities. I mean, you can't just sue the United States government, period. You have to, kind of focus in on who you want to pick. But I something tells me he knows who to sue. He knows who to get service of process on, because he already has a suit in federal court, and it's humming right along. And in the course of discovery, there are going to be witnesses that'll have to give sworn testimony, and the military, or some part of our military, could be held liable. And if they do that, that's great. I mean, sometimes I wonder, maybe you do too, Steve. I wonder how much of what I've experienced is ET, and how much of it could be, U.S. government or somebody's government.
Yeah, I know that's a live issue, particularly in your case, having read Devil's Den. Open mouth and gobsmacked in the middle section. When you were in the state park in Arkansas, and the subsequent to that, your experience with the OSI guys, and who those guys who made you sign stuff and made you do the hypnosis sessions, which you were very clever with, all that stuff. I was just amazed, astounded that there seemed to be a cadre of people who knew what was going on. Am I right?
Yeah,
do you have it? Yeah,
absolutely.
I've come up against no such thing over here in my life and experiences, but there are so many people who, like you, have these undeniable certainties about this, and an experience at the hands of these people, that I'm convinced that somebody knows what's going on.
I think it's fair to say that for us, to one degree or another, especially at different times in the ongoing nature of our work and our own personal evolution or focus, that we become, quote unquote, people of interest to certain elements within the intelligence community, military industrial complex. This is not some romantic, self-aggrandizing, fantasy. People
there's an incident
problematic and have to be kept an eye on. And Steve certainly, I think this is a reflection of what happened with his book, But going back to the connection, whatever it may or may not be with the military, Terry, to what degree did you feel that the Air Force per se was aware of your other life as an abductee, as an experiencer? Do you think they were completely clueless, or that you were singled out in some way, or that there's some registry within, higher levels of military intelligence where these things are known? Your thoughts on that? And I know it's not, definitive
It's
answer.
speculation, but yeah, I kind of feel like I was picked out, labeled, put in a folder somewhere. Same with my friend Toby.
Yes.
I the whole thing, that when we went to Devil's Den, it had the vibe of keeping an appointment more so than showing up to have a campfire and burn hot dogs.
Great way to put it.
It did have that vibe to it. Is that true? I don't know. But I know that there are a lot of anomalous events in my life that, I chalk up to either, and it speaks to the power that these extraterrestrial things have over us. I don't know where to lay the blame, because it could be either.
Yeah. Steve, at this point, kind of poised on the edge of round two, any thoughts for individuals watching or listening to this show and shows like it, who are, in term of one of Dave Jacobs' best known books, living a secret life? Family, friends, career, business, children, paying your bills, but that you live with this as a reality, and maybe even your nearest and dearest don't know. Here we are talking publicly about it, with two of the four of us speaking openly about these types of experiences in their own life. To somebody who can only either wish that they had the avenue, the courage, the support to come forward and say, this has happened to me too, but can't for any number of reasons. Any thoughts or advice or observations you would like to pass on to them?
I'd just like to say that I wasn't the brave one here. I waited until I was retired and severed my connections with the legal community before I wrote and published my book. So
It still takes a certain amount of bravery, but I hear you.
Likewise, I waited until I retired from. I was a company director in the managing director of a company that's made medical diagnostic equipment and surgical equipment, and I was traveling all over the world and seeing very high level people. And I thought, if I published out of time whilst working in my business, I think my credibility might have been damaged potentially quite seriously. It would have caused a stir nevertheless. So I waited till I retired and then did it for the same reason.
Either of you, Steve or Terry, had the experience of interacting with even one person since your book or books have come out that you knew in your old life, either for you, Terry, in the world of the law or in the military, and for Steve in the world of business that you conducted so diligently for so many years, who has become aware of who you are in this other world and their reaction? There may be no case like this, but off the top of your head, Terry first.
Yeah, my experience was in 1977. Steve, I think yours was in 1972.
The trigger event, what I call the trigger event, was in 1972. Yeah,
Okay.
It forms the prologue of the book. Yeah,
When
it's not the only experience, but it's a really significant standout experience. Yeah. I didn't have the injuries and trauma and follow up that you did of anything like that. It was completely different, of a completely different level. But yeah.
Well, the question is, how did people that knew me responded to
Yeah.
the fact that I published this book?
Mm.
And I was absolutely shocked. Some of the people that I thought would be would condemn me supported me,
Wow.
and vice versa.
Huh.
So
Yeah.
and I don't care. I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to tell the truth, and whoever wants to believe and come along. I'm not out to convince anyone. I'm just here to say this is it. This is what happened to me.
Steve?
And,
I went to see somebody on the first weekend of July. We were away from my wife's birthday, and on the way back, we went to see somebody who I've known really well for 20 years, a professional woman who I've dealt with professionally for many, many years, and we became kind of personal friends. I knew where she lived, and she lived near where we were staying, so we popped in to see her, and I've not seen her for a few years. And she said, when I got the book out of my rucksack and handed it to her and dedicated it to her, and she looked at it and said, I wish you'd told me about this while we were doing all that, this stuff we were doing together. We could have had such interesting conversations, but you never mentioned it. So some people have reacted like that. Some people have reacted like
conversations.
Open minds waiting to speak. Chris, your thoughts on this? When let me put the question to you this way: somebody that you are a professional photographer and photograph, weddings, events, commercial photography. Have you ever encountered an individual who was a client who was aware of your life in the world of UFO studies and their reaction to it that either caught you off guard or was memorable in some way?
No. I had an experience of doing one wedding. Things went wrong, and she wasn't happy with me. I said, look, I'll do this for you to make up for that. And, she said, yeah, okay, I'll accept that, not a problem. Once it became, there was an article in our local daily rag called the Hull Daily Mail, which pointed out that something had been seen over the skies of Hull, and they asked me for a few comments. And I noticed on a Facebook page, she did slag me off quite a little bit, even though I'd placated her with, I'm sorry, I'll do this and make up for that, and all the rest of it. And it was all over and done with. That's the only bad experience that I've had. But it just shows, what Terry's gone through, and even Steve, and even yourself, and me, to some extent, of how good the ridicule factor has been, which has been set off by those in control, the authorities, whether that be in the USA, Great Britain. In Great Britain, nothing will change here, like it has in America with the hearings, until the British government turns round and says, yes, there is something going on. And sorry, but the no defense significance argument that they have, if America can say they're a threat and Britain can say no defense significance, well, who's lying? All that has to change before we can move forward with the subject as a whole.
well said.
It's true that it's in terms of governmental and official think, certainly on part of the military, the intelligence community, if your target of interest, target is too strong a word, but the subject of interest has too many unknowns attached, then it's time to load up and make sure that everybody is at their post just in case. The assumption, well, let's face it, every fear that we have as human beings, no matter how it may seem to be about a different subject, it all comes down to fear of the unknown.
One of the things I did want to say, Peter, is
please,
members of my family they've actually started talking to me now about UFOs, and this since 2017, when we had the sea change. And it isn't something, why would people like Steve and people like Terry, why would they lie? Why would people go out and scoop parts of their own body, the flesh out, just to get a little bit of attention and say, yeah, I was visited last night. People wouldn't do that. It's not a normal thing to do with 99.9% of the populace of the world.
Well, there is one case I am aware of, that you are aware of an individual who, for narcissistic, sociopathic kind of reasons, decided to do their best to become famous because of an alleged incident that they were involved in. But you're right, overwhelmingly, why would anybody go out of their way to single themselves out? It's like having a tattoo on your forehead. Do you really want to bring attention to yourself in this particular manner?
Exactly.
And I think the overwhelming answer to anybody who's remotely rational is no. That's nothing that I would consider. And the closest thing we have to a stat that Steve mentioned of 2 to 5%, that's a shatteringly, unbelievably huge number. Over the decades I've been involved in the work, the closest I've been able to come to saying something like that is, unless you've been living under a rock, or you are a true hermit, or you isolate yourself from people as much as possible, the chances are excellent that at least one person has had these things happen to them, and it is part of the core of their secret life, or they confide to one particular person or a very small select group, but that we all know someone this has happened to. If I'm even remotely close to saying something factual there, that's the most explosive allegation anybody could make in this world. Everybody knows somebody this has happened to. Well, I think in my life alone, the number of people, and again, I'm a public person in it, and I deal with people that have had experiences, but I think about people who have come out of my business life, my personal life, social life, romantic life, who have said at one point or another, this has happened to me. And the ratio in just my life alone, it still is mind-boggling to me. And I hope in a way I never get to the point where I say, oh yes, it's an abduction case, this person was taken. That word case, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, it's the right word to use in this context, but it's such a dispassionate, disconnected word to associate with perhaps the most emotional, the most life-changing, the most wonderful, or the most terrifying experience of your life. But we see it over and over and over, and may we never become desensitized to it, because this is what we do.
Bud Hopkins used to have a lot of trouble with professional debunkers like the late Philip Klass and other people of that kind, who used to say that all these people were hoaxers and they were just seeking attention. They weren't having these experiences. He could explain them as mundane. There's always a rational explanation. And Bud used to come back and say, you're crazy if you think that anybody would want this to happen to them. What these things that people report happening to them. Nobody wants this. Nobody welcomes it. It's an intrusion into your life, and yes. Or when they stick these things into your body and you psychologically mess with you and cause these deep traumas in your psyche and so forth. Nobody wants this. Nobody looks for it. Nobody welcomes it. And he had a lot of trouble getting people to accept that. Some people to accept that. Most people, I think, acknowledge that if people claim or think these things are happening to them, then they probably are, or they believe they are. But there's a minority of people who are determined to deny the reality of it and always want to belittle and condemn abductees or people who've claimed to have these experiences, which is a contemptible attitude really, but they've got their constituency out there which thinks like that. There's just one thing that's, I think when Philip Klass, everybody who knows who he is, right, or was.
Well,
died a few years ago.
for any viewer or listener, he was probably the best known and most effective debunker, and was kind of personally tutored by Donald K. Menzel, the head of astronomy studies at Harvard, who was the godfather of UFO debunkers.
Well, he went to a publisher with his manuscripts. The book is called UFO Abductions, A Dangerous Game, or something like that.
I'm in it.
Yeah, you're in it. When he went to the first publisher, the publisher said to him, Mr. Klass, when people publish books about UFOs and abductions, and the book says that these are not happening, people don't buy those books. There's no market for them. Because, the only people who buy the books are those genuinely interested in the phenomenon. Yeah. So you publish a book saying they don't exist. Who are you going to sell that to? The market's not there, really.
You remind me, Steve, Bud, whose observations about this phenomenon, the people involved, positive or negative, could be particularly insightful, sharp. Yes, insightful and sharp, and sometimes barbed. And I remember times where he used to, with mock seriousness, discuss how marvelous, how worthy of respect this group of individuals was, who actually knew empirically that these things didn't happen. Where here we were, feeling our way around in the dark, trying to wrap our heads around what these witnesses, experiencers, abductees were reporting, and yet how marvelous that these other people, they knew the truth. We should look up to them and revere them, because
he called them the true believers,
among other things. Yeah. And I as time has gone on, I still get pissed off at these people sometimes if there's a mean-spiritedness or a direct attack on somebody's character. But let's all remember that informing that anxiety that is encountered when you're presented with this as a possibility, there are a lot of people that are just scared to admit that it's really real, because then they're going to go through what in our own ways we went through.
Do you have a cat there, Peter?
Yes, I do. And a visitor. But that, how can I say, we all go through that door of, can this be happening? And have to sort it out for ourselves before we kind of come out the other door and say it is. And where do I stand in this work? Or how do I articulate this? Or how do I contribute? We're coming into the last 10 minutes of our show. And I wanted to go back to you, Chris, and the fact that one of the things you do is you are an information source. You publish a monthly magazine. You have your own radio network, which I'm proud to have a monthly show on, UAP Global Perspective. You have other colleagues, and you organize conferences, as well as you're a clearinghouse in your part of the UK for this subject. Do you see your role shifting at all the last few years as an information source, or your responsibility to those who subscribe to the publication, or who contact you for a comment for a newspaper article? What's your thought on that? Well,
he's disappeared.
Yeah, he did. Well, that's one way to escape a difficult question. I think that's very sneaky, in fact. Of course, there's no possibility it was technical. This is obviously something engineered by either the National Security Agency or the aliens, and I'm going on record here as having a little fun at my own expense. Terry, as a fairly long time observer of this subject, how do you assess how things have accelerated, changed, and in a way become more exciting as we've come into this last 2 years or so, and we're hearing things that I never thought we would hear in the halls of the United States Congress.
You know, in the last 2 years, December 2022, NASA changed the acronym from unidentified aerial phenomenon to unidentified anomalous phenomenon, thus taking into consideration under the sea, on the land, above, different planets, I mean, anywhere. I think that was just kind of an that should have been a bigger news story,
Yeah.
because I think that's kind of an admission in itself. And I think that there are two camps. There are the people that like us, and then the people that aren't like us. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Welcome back. Anything exciting when you were in the other dimension?
Yeah, I was not abducted. No, I apologise for that, Peter. I don't know what went wrong there. Just crashed on me.
No apology necessary. And complete that thought, Terry.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Who remembers the
You
question?
mentioned that I was a clearinghouse.
Yes,
for,
that in your work as a publisher, as a broadcaster, as a producer, as somebody who is queried about this subject, who is quoted on it.
Well,
given some obvious changes in the last few years, have you seen your role change, or can you give us an example of how things are shifting for you in your position?
The subject since 2017, as we all know, I keep mentioning it, it has changed. There are more people willing to talk about the subject. There are fewer people who, snigger behind your back. Well, as far as I'm aware, there are fewer people. Nobody's the only people, that have changed are those who have a genuine open mind and a genuine interest in the subject.
Yes.
You still get your Philip classes, you still get the occasional, but they're becoming less and less and less. I mean, for God's sake, if the American government can turn around and say, oh, hang on, folks, there is something in this subject, we don't know what it is, then that is a big step forward on its own. I remember being interviewed by the BBC Radio Humberside, which is our local radio station. I walked in, sat down, and the first question she asked me was, have you ever been probed? Ha, ha, ha.
Unfortunately, that word became part of the lexicon, selected out of every word in Whitley Strieber's fabulously internationally best-selling book, Communion. And that's
absolutely
what the wags locked on to. Ha, ha, ha.
Yeah. But I'll tell you something, guys. The lady interviewer and the two other people, one of the other people sat there with me was, I'm sure you know, Peter, was Mike Covell. We was both being interviewed, but as soon as I started, well, not personally, but if the New York Times, which is the biggest selling newspaper of its kind in the United States, probably the world, can point out that the Pentagon says there is something behind this subject, it does quite kind of open, the doors a little bit more to people accepting what has been going on. And the interview changed completely. It really did. She was asking me things about, Terry mentioned earlier on, we spoke earlier on about the legality of doing certain things. And she even brought up the Cash Landrum incident, which we all know went to, just bring it back to what we were talking about, that went to court in America. She tried to prove either the US was involved or it was something else. Now, what it was, again, I don't know, but it's a fascinating thing. And that's the only thing for me that has changed, in that people are a little bit more willing just to talk to you more openly and tell you things. Now, to get information out to people, I make no decisions on the outcome of the radio article, radio thing that I do, what goes in the magazine. I edit it, of course, but I do not put any comments at the end of it. I leave it open for people to make their own minds up.
Steve, we're coming into the last 3 minutes or so. Closing thoughts at this moment as far as where you and your book stand, and to remind folks where they can find it.
Yes, they can find it in any bookstore. It's if you go to a Barnes and Noble store in the US, or onto the Barnes and Noble website, you'll find it there. You just put the ISBN number in, or put the author's name and the title of the book, which is Out of Time: The Intergenerational Abduction Program Explored. Steve Aspin is the author, and if the store can't find it in the catalogue, they should find it in the catalogue. If you take the ISBN number with you, which you can find on the outoftimebook.info website.
Very good.
Outoftimebook.info. So all the ordering information is going to be on there, and from the 24th of August, you can get it from your high street bookstore, from the Barnes and Noble website, from the Waterstones website, from the Foyles website, or from the retail outlets, or get it from any online source, because it'll be on widespread sale in 3 formats: hardback with color interior, paperback with grayscale interior, and an ebook.
And as a fan and a very moved reader of that book, I recommend it without reservation. Also, remember, you can pick up Terry Lovelace's book, the Devil's Den pair of books, Devil's Den True Story, Devil's Den The Reckoning. And Chris Evers' new book will be out probably in December as things stand now. It's being published by the Flying Disc Press. And it's going to be another one that you're going to want to add to your library.
That's called The Shape of Things to Come from Elsewhere, with a foreword by Peter Robbins.
Well, that's your problem, not mine. But I love the homage to the great H.G. Wells in one of his greatest wonderful pieces of science fiction. Guys, it's been a pleasure. Our 2 hours have flown by too fast. Steve Aspin, Terry Lovelace, and Chris Evers, thanks so much for being with me. We will be back next week with Meanwhile Here on Earth. In the meanwhile, this is Peter Robbins and my guest signing off, saying stay well, fight for what you believe in, and be kind to each other.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Peter.